Welcome to Influential Entrepreneurs, bringing you interviews with elite business leaders and experts, sharing tips and strategies for elevating your business to the next level. Here's your host, Mike Saunders.
Hello and welcome to this episode of Influential Entrepreneurs. This is Mike Saunders, the Authority Positioning Coach. Today we have with us David Wood, who is the founder of Play for Real and Evangelist for Tough Conversations. David, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Mike. Excited to be here.
Hey, so looking at your bio, you've got quite a lengthy, storied, solid past with corporate America and some wonderful opportunities that way. Bring us up to speed on what brought you to founding Play for Real, and then we want to dive right into what is the mission and cause that you are working with in Tough Conversations.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, Tough Conversations is something I'm very excited about. I started life, I feel, as a consulting actuary. So for people who don't know, my job was to deal with complex statistics and long-term financial projections. And I worked for an international HR consulting firm and was consulting with some big clients like Exxon and Ford and Sony Music and Chanel. And it wasn't enough for me. I'd kind of made it in a way, and I was getting paid well, and I'm dealing with these great clients, and I'm getting flown to Switzerland business class, and I'm like, this is great. But something was missing, and fortunately, I discovered personal growth. And I used to look down on it and think that that was for weak people. Self-help is just for self-help junkies, and I'm not going to be one of those people. I'm going to get in, and I'm going to get out. But something happened during my first program, or maybe the second program I did with them. They cracked my cynicism. And I realized that there are people who actually want to make a difference in the world, and they're devoting their life to it. And I ended up coaching accidentally. I just couldn't help myself coach people in the program when they got stuck. I'd be like, well, the leader said this yesterday. Why don't you try that? And I actually made a difference to someone's life in a 30-minute conversation. And I thought, let me just see if I could go in this direction. So I ended up, it didn't happen this quickly, but the short version is I quit my job on Park Avenue, and I started studying coaching and embarked on my own journey of personal growth over the last 20 years, because you can't coach or lead somebody else unless you've been there yourself, really. So that's the short version of how I got to coaching. And I found that when I looked at what do I really love and where can I make the biggest difference, I found that I have a skill. My superpower is being able to role play any tough conversation, so that you can go from, I don't know how to have this conversation and I don't want to have it, to, hey, I can step up and be a leader, and I can go and make a difference for myself and others with this conversation.
And I think I love that intro, because so many times you hear people that say, when I was a child, I fell and had this horrible accident, and this chiropractor changed my life and, put my back in order, and so I became a chiropractor, or whatever, because that your personal life experience tends to be that outworking of what you want to then do in the world. So your personal growth story and path is just so powerful, because you're speaking from experience, not just teaching out of a book. Well, here's what you ought to do, and so I think that really makes it real. Let's talk about something that you just mentioned regarding Tough Conversations, and I know we'll get into this, but you said something like, for myself and for others. Well, maybe people would gloss right over the word myself, because shouldn't we be having tough conversations with ourselves?
Well, yeah, you've opened up a whole new world there. My main focus at the moment is to enroll people in the possibility of those tough conversations, because we tend to avoid them, and the mind just sweeps them under the rug and says, I don't need to talk to my secretary about that, or I don't need to talk to my wife or my kid around that, or that's just going to be awkward. I'm going to skip that. And my job is to help sell it, and so that people can see how amazing it can be in transforming themselves in their relationships. But you open up a whole new world. Sometimes the toughest conversation we need to have is with ourselves. And I've realized that the tough conversation with someone else is often not the actual conversation. It's the conversation you have with yourself in the days or weeks leading up to it.
Yeah.
It's talking yourself out of it a million times. It's like, I don't want to have that because I'm going to feel rejected or embarrassed or I'm going to upset them. Sometimes that's the tough conversation.
You know, like you said, you open up a whole new world, and we could talk for hours on end on that one aspect. But I think it relates to something that we see so many times when you hear in sales. Hey, you need to believe in your product or service before you can really sell it well, because people can kind of tell. If you sell Toyotas and you pull up to the lot in your Buick or whatever the case is, people are like, really? You don't believe in it enough to do that? And then I think so many times that when we're trying to develop your own confidence, your confidence gets improved and increased every single time that you see yourself succeeding, doing something, hearing a testimonial, hearing an attaboy. So, boy, that's a really big thing, is we tend to talk ourselves out of something and then kind of like, we'll sweep that under the rug. I'm sure it'll be fine. Well, how do you make that first step to get past that?
Well, let me address something you said first. It's true. Every time we do something that's difficult, our confidence improves.
Yeah.
And this is one of the reasons I want everyone in the world to start addressing those conversations that are awkward, because we push back the boundaries of our life, and these tough conversations become the defining moments that literally shape our careers, our relationships, and our lives. So that's a good reason to do it. And I want to address something else you said, about this tough conversation with ourselves. I'd love to do a whole interview just on that one day, and we just look at how we beat ourselves up, the negative self-talk, and what those tough conversations with ourselves look like. But for now, I think it's safe to say, if we just start focusing on those tough conversations with others in our lives and in our business, that'll cover it. That'll cover our self-growth, and that'll cover our confidence. Now, your question, can you ask it again? It was, what's the first step?
To moving past the feeling of, well, I don't really need to have that tough conversation. Kind of, I'm giving in to myself, talking myself out of doing it. So how do you kind of get past that to then approach and then do that tough conversation in whatever it is, whether it's your, coworker, colleague in a business transaction that you need to address, or maybe in your personal life with a spouse or loved one?
Yeah, I love that you just made it real, because some people are thinking, what tough conversation? But those are some good examples. Some people might have to tell someone in the office that they've got BO.
Yeah, right.
Some people might need to set a boundary and say, hey, I'd rather you don't talk to me like that. I feel put down when you say that. Can you say it a different way? There's so many examples. Now, the first step is we have to identify that tough conversation, because, again, the mind will sweep it under the rug.
Yeah.
So here's a great exercise that anyone can do, any listener can do. Get a pen and paper and just write down anyone you have the slightest problem with. Anybody. It could be someone you wouldn't want to cross in the street or see at a party. It could be someone in the office that you don't feel fully supported by, or it's just there's something in between you. You don't even have to know what the conversation is. So you list those people, and then next to them, you write down what's the issue, what's the problem. And then from there, once you've identified the problem, which the mind is pretty good at, the mind will give you problems. Then you can write next to that, what could that conversation look like? So that's the beginning. Now, let's say you've got the beginnings of a conversation. Here are some steps that you can use. One, write down the intention. Why would I bother having this with the person? If you can't come up with some profit, and I don't mean just money, I mean if you can't come up with an advantage that the benefit is going to outweigh the potential discomfort, then you're not going to have that conversation. That's fine. So what's the profit, or what's the intention? And it could be something like, Mike, can I share something that's been on my mind for a while, and I want to share it because I think it's going to help us have a better working relationship, or at least help me. It might just clear the air. You got a couple of minutes for that, right? So you work out what's the intention or hope that you have out of it, and that's going to help you enroll that person in having the conversation. The second thing I think is very important is write down a fear or a concern that you have. There's a reason this is a tough conversation in your mind. You might be worried that they'll get angry, or you might be worried that they'll get defensive, or you might be worried that they're not going to listen to you, or they'll judge you as being too sensitive, or whatever it is. It's really good to get to the core of, why am I even calling this a tough conversation? And I say you're winning and increasing your self-awareness already, even before you go and pick up the phone. So I call those, I guess those are 3 steps. Like, find a problem, which you can turn into a conversation, and then write down an intention or a hope, and then write down a fear. And now you're in a much better position to actually go to that person and start having it. And I have a 4-step blueprint to doing this. So if this is like a lot for listeners to remember, you'll be able to get this on the website.
Very good. 4-step blueprint. I like checklist and blueprints, so let's make sure that at the end we point people to that. You know, one thing that you said that I thought was really neat, because it's like so many things in life and business, there's similarities, right? So like you said, hey, let's start with, what the outcome should be. Well, begin with the end in mind, Stephen Covey, and we need to see what the fear and the problem might be. Well, there's the gap. So, where are we at now? Where do we want to be? And then something that I attribute to Brian Tracy that I learned years and years ago, what's everyone's favorite radio station? Do you know this one?
Is it What's in It for Me?
Yeah, WIIFM. And so when we can think about this tough conversation through the lens of what's in it for me, but not me personally, but me, the other person. So what's in it for them? What's in it for the outcome? Then it's not a selfish thing like, man, I got to get this conversation so that I can get this deal. No. You want to come from the feeling of what you're describing, which is serving and giving value, so that the greater good is our relationships better, or the team operates better, or the organization. But when you can think of it like that, now I would venture to say that there's some people that would feel like, well, I'm just so crusty that I'm going to approach this conversation. It's going to all come out wrong. I mean, right. But when you can think about it for a second and go through these steps, now when you approach it, maybe that person's like, yeah, I can chat for a minute or two. And then now it's just going to be a conversation like, let's put our heads together and figure this thing out, because wouldn't we both want this outcome? Yes.
Man, I'm enjoying talking to you, because you've just opened 3 really important topics. Like, we could do a whole other interview on enrollment, which is basically sales. But what you're talking about is, I want to enroll this person in having the conversation. And there are a couple of other things that we're doing here. We're getting permission or buy-in for the conversation, rather than just dumping it on them. Rather than dumping it on them and saying, hey, I got this issue with you, you're actually giving them a chance to say yes or no. Do you have a few minutes for a conversation on this? Now, if they say no, okay, maybe you can reschedule. It's not a good time, or maybe they're not enrolled and you need to do some more work on that. If they say yes, you've now got them in a different position. They're in a mindset where they're actually listening and they're kind of with you in a way. So I don't normally talk about this, but I wanted to unpack it, because you started opening up all these ninja things that we're doing, and just saying to someone, hey, here's something that I think could help both of us, and particularly me. Like, I'll be honest about it. Do you have a few minutes for it? I think it could really help.
And when you come at it like that, what's the person going to say? No. I mean, because you're kind of being honest. It's like in sales, where you're like, look, I'm going to be honest with you. I'm going to tell you what I've got, and if it seems to be a fit, then let's work together. If not, let's part as friends. But, I'm not going to push you. I'm not going to ask for your credit card on this conversation. Let's just kind of explore. And I think when people are real like that and authentic, I think that other person goes, let's take the next step. Sure, because they don't feel like they're getting set up.
Yeah, I rarely have someone say no to a request like this. I did have it recently with a friend who just said, you know what, I don't want to process stuff. We're not really good friends. I just don't want that. And I was like, wow, okay, that's good to know. Yeah. So I'm just not going to go there, and we're going to have a bit of distance between us, and she's okay with that. And I am too. But most people are very responsive when you approach it like this.
But think of that one example you just gave. What if you had blown right by the asking permission step and just barged right into the tough conversation? the outcome might have been way worse than her saying politely, "Hey, no, I don't want to." So I think that those checks and balances are there for the overall good too.
Yeah, and here's a real chance to practice a little humility and kindness if there's a power dynamic. So I imagine a lot of people listening to this are entrepreneurs, and you may have a team of people who report to you. I've got a client who's a vice president at a big media company, and we talked about this asking permission, and what he would normally do is just knock on the door, walk into someone's office or cubicle, and say, "Hey, I want to give you some feedback on this," and he'd just do it.
Yeah,
and he could do that because he's a vice president. But now, after this conversation, he was able to go in and say, "Hey, I want to give you some feedback on that project because I think it's going to, it's going to help me because you're going to be more in line with what I'm looking for. And I think it might help you too. You might get something out of it. Do you have a few minutes now for that conversation?" Wouldn't that be amazing if your boss comes to you like that every time?
Yeah. It levels, if you still have that respect and fear level there, but when they are respecting then that other employee's space, now the interaction, I would venture to say, would be a lot more viable than just barking out orders and saying my time is more valuable, do this and here's the feedback, and then they're out of there like a bull in a china closet, as they say.
Yes, so we're talking about respect. I'm glad you used that word. And what I'm seeing right now in this moment is that as you start to come from respect and as you create an intention or a hope that includes the other person, that has something in it for them, my hope is that these conversations start to look less tough. They start to look less scary. And I'm hoping that all listeners can start to see, all right, I could take a conversation that looks scary and tough, and by following this process, it can start to become relational and something that both of us could get something out of.
Yeah, I like to shift gears a little bit and come at the same topic of tough conversations from a different angle, which is your work in the prison system. So give a little bit of a background that way, and then kind of tie the how do you have conversations with inmates to teach them how to have these tough conversations, and how is that similar to working with a team or an entrepreneur or a CEO?
Yeah. Well, I feel fortunate. I've been wanting to do something with prisons. Whenever I hear that someone's like going in and they're dancing with inmates, and I just felt like there's something there for me. And so I had the opportunity to go with a team and check it out. And now I'm co-leading something called the Art of Being Human. And part of that is tough conversations. And it's run by authenticrelating.org. It's a great nonprofit. This woman is just cold calling prisons and saying, we want to come in and help inmates be more relational, and we want to help them with their tough conversations, both in prison and when they get out.
Yeah.
So they're facing conversations when they get out like, would you hire me? And here's why you should hire me, even though I was involved in armed robbery, or even though I killed somebody, I still think you should hire me. Now, there's a tough conversation.
Yep.
There's another inmate who I hope to interview on my podcast who's got to have a conversation with the widow of the man that she indirectly killed.
Wow.
When she was involved in an armed robbery. Now, those are some tough conversations. They also, in the yard, two of the toughest conversations they have is when someone bumps them, because you're not allowed to touch. You're not allowed to touch in the prison other than a business handshake. And if someone bumps them, that's a pretty scary conversation. And also, someone might just come up to them and they'll call them bitch. They'll be like, hey, bitch, which is usually an invitation to a fight.
Right.
So we help them with those conversations. And you know what? It's the same process. It's the same process in prison as it is with a CEO. You identify a problem you got with someone and you turn that into a possible conversation. You come up with a hope or intention for the conversation, and you come up with a fear. What am I worried about? I'm worried that you might beat the shit out of me. I'm worried that I'm going to get more time added to my sentence.
Yeah.
If we have this conversation and if we fight. And then you share the actual thing. This is in the blueprint. And then you check for impact. How is it for you to hear that? I'd like to hear how this lands for you. It's the same process in prison as it is with the CEO, because we're all human. We all have the same fears, although a CEO may not be afraid of getting beaten up in the negotiation. Right. It's still a fear of, I'm going to look small, I'm going to be rejected, I'm going to feel hurt in some way. It's incredible, the overlap, because we're all human.
Yeah, I think that's a really big point to keep in mind. Is it's the same 4 steps. There are outcomes. Now, that outcome for the inmate is different than the outcome for the solopreneur versus even the CEO of a large corporation, but it still needs to be that kind of pause. And I forget who it was, but it's a TED Talk or one of the authors and columnists of Success Magazine, but talking about like the 5-second pause, like before you do anything, or whether you react or respond or get upset, just pause. Because so many times it's kind of like the old school, let me just sleep on it. And it works, because if you can pause and kind of think for 2 seconds even, or 3 seconds, things can change. So I think that whole checklist process and what do you want to accomplish with this? What's the problem? How do you get there? Is just such a critical piece. And I think that is one of the hurdles to get over would be that fear and discomfort. What do you tell someone that you're working with, personal or professional, how to kind of push past that discomfort and still move forward to having that tough conversation?
Yeah. Well, firstly, just on the pause, normally we're speaking about how to go and take a conversation to someone, but that pause is really useful when someone's coming at you. Yeah. When someone's got an upset or angry with you, like in the prison yard, when someone's like, bitch, right? In the corporate world, it could be a subordinate coming to you and they're upset by something that was said to them, something you said to them. They're feeling offended, they're crying, they're angry, whatever. And so that's a whole different process, which, again, we might get into in another interview. And it does involve, firstly, do nothing and listen. And that's where that pause comes in. Now, you said the discomfort. Boy, what a great topic. I mean, I could do a book on this, and I think someone probably has. We tend to naturally run from discomfort. And we've gotten to a point, like maybe 200, 300 years ago, we could handle a lot of discomfort. You know, we had to like go out and kill a bear to eat. And we had, the chance of someone, a lot more chance of rape and being beaten up and being killed. And we just lived with discomfort. And it wasn't that uncomfortable because we lived with it. Now, if our chair doesn't go back far enough in the plane, we're uncomfortable and upset. Yep. If the Wi-Fi is glitchy on a plane, then we're upset. So we don't have a lot of tolerance for discomfort. And unfortunately, that flows over into tough conversations like, I don't want to talk to that person because what? I'm going to feel uncomfortable? Yeah. Well, one thing you can do is to start leaning into discomfort. Again, because of the profit that we're looking at, because of the outcomes that we're looking at, because of the growth. Because I say just outside that discomfort zone, just outside it, or no, actually in it. So just outside your comfort zone is where the gold is. That's where you're going to transform your relationships and you're going to push back your horizons. So if you're interested in this, you can, when you're having a shower, just towards the end of the shower, start turning it towards cold. Mm-hmm. You could, if you can actually get there, have a cold shower for that last 30 seconds. I go to the creek near my house and I sit into it and I lay down, and boy, is that uncomfortable. Yeah. It's cold. But this is a way you can train yourself to just say, hey, discomfort's not that big a deal. It's not going to kill me. And then choose a tough conversation today from this interview and go and be willing to be vulnerable, because that's where the magic happens.
I love it. Let's just wrap up with that thought, because it's a very wonderful landing of the plane point. What's the best way that people can take that assessment and get the blueprint that you mentioned?
Yeah, thank you. So particularly if you manage a team or a company and you're interested in your company leaning into tough conversations so that everyone can be more engaged and actually love where they work and thrive as a team, then I'd love to hear from you. Go to playforreal.life. That's playforreal.life. And you can take the 5-minute life assessment. You can subscribe to the podcast. And I'd love to hear from you so that we can transform tough conversations in your workplace or for you, for your life. And you can definitely get the 4-step blueprint to tough conversations.
Wonderful. David, thank you so much for coming on. It's really great chatting with you today.
Oh, thanks, Mike. I've really enjoyed this. You've got skill.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Influential Entrepreneurs with Mike Saunders. To learn more about the resources mentioned on today's show or listen to past episodes, visit www.influentialentrepreneurssradio.com.